So thank you all very much for coming. This is the conference. This is the daytime part of AVA. Obviously, you will all know that AVA is this grassroots phenomenon taking place for the second year in Northern Ireland, designed to kind of amplify, grow, and develop the electronic music industry in Northern Ireland. That's very much what the daytime conference is about. We started it last year. We then took it to Mumbai in March of this year alongside a delegation of friends and colleagues who work in the electronic music industry in Northern Ireland, and also other friends such as Mark, who delivered our opening keynote in Mumbai. And now we find ourselves back here at our home in Belfast to spend a couple of hours talking to you really about the kind of ecosystem of electronic music here, but also globally, trends, opportunities, networks, what's going on. And this opening fireside chat or sofa chat or whatever it's called is really the starting point, given what's going to happen later on, is about the live music culture. You will all know that in the UK over the last 10 years, we have seen a 50% drop in venues. So that means a lot of venues have closed, a lot of people have less opportunity to play live, to develop their careers. But the other part of what that means is that for those people who want those transformative moments, young people kind of starting to engage with electronic music, there is less opportunities. So what are we going to do about that? How can we kind of address this problem? Is it indeed a problem at all? That's what we're going to chat about. So we have Dave and we have Mark. We're going to give them each about 5 minutes to talk to you. Then we'll have a bit of a discussion for the next 3 hours, we decided, downstairs, because we have a lot to get through.
We could just keep
going. So
going.
Get comfy. We're going to cancel all the other sessions, and then we'll maybe have a little bit of Q&A at the end. So starting with Dave, I'll let you introduce yourself, and kind of why don't you start by setting up this landscape.
Good morning. I'm Dave Haslam. I DJ'd at the world-famous Hacienda nightclub before it was world-famous. And then subsequently, 450 times, I lived there, basically. I play myself in 24-hour party people with uncanny accuracy. And I wrote a book last year called Life After Dark, which is a 200-year history of nightclubs and music venues. And I just thought I'd take this opportunity just to kind of remind us what are the value of nightclubs and music venues. And the first value, I think, is on a personal tip. You know, I think everyone in this room can identify the venue or the club that they were at in their formative years that turned them on to music. You know, it might have been a DJ playing a certain tune. It might have been a band you saw. And that kind of feeling like, I am at home. This means everything to me. This is the world I want to be in. And not just people in this room, but people all over Britain have that feeling. That is the power of Life After Dark. I've got a friend called Denise who wrote on Facebook a couple of years ago. I don't know what triggered this, but she wrote this one morning on her status, and I carry it with me to look at in moments of kind of despair or gloom, because it absolutely cheers me up. This is what Denise says. The first time I went to the Hacienda at the tender age of 17, we shouldn't have let her in, basically. Giddy with excitement that we'd got in, I can remember just as I was walking through the doors, Dave Haslam was playing. All of a sudden, I was home, and all my teenage dreams had come true, and everything made sense. And that, to me, is the best fucking review I've ever had. And it's not just, the Hacienda. I think, the Dugout in Bristol, Daddy Warbucks in Glasgow, obviously places in Belfast where people have those kind of moments where they think this is my tribe, this is where I belong. And I think that's another value, is that tribal thing. You grow up in a town or city, you don't necessarily relate to everyone around you, and you're looking for somewhere where you feel at home, and you want your tribe, and you walk in somewhere, and that is your tribe. And I think if you are, say, the gay community, they need venues where people, young people, can feel safe in that kind of environment. The black community, historically, likewise, have found a sense of identity in clubs. So they also have an importance, therefore, in terms of our cities, how we define our cities. You can take away every luxury apartment that was ever built, and no one would really care. You're not losing the soul of your city. But you take away the Cavern and Eric's and Cream from the history of Liverpool, and you lose almost anything of cultural value apart from two often unperforming football teams. And that is the same in every town and city. Obviously, it's the same in Belfast. In my book, I talk about, those Belfast clubs. Finally, the music. The clubs and the venues are the breeding ground of new music scenes. Massive Attack started out as a little DJ crew in the basement of what is now a South Korean restaurant on the outskirts of Bristol, playing funk and bits of hip-hop. And that's where they came together. The Chemical Brothers walked into the Hacienda in 1989. 2 students from down south. The Hacienda was cool. They came in the club. It was owned by New Order. They walked through the doors just as Denise had done. And they were turned on to a whole load of music they would not have heard if the Hacienda wasn't there. And they started coming Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Wednesday. They stopped going to lectures. They came out, they formed the Dust Brothers, then they turned into the Chemical Brothers. 11 years after walking into the Hacienda, they were headlining Glastonbury. And it started in a venue or a club, and it always does. So that's the importance of venues and clubs to individuals, communities, cities, and music fans. And having just written a 200-year history of that, I can tell you every generation feels like your generation did in terms of identifying with venues. And if you talk about the downturn, which we might do in clubs and venues, things change. Music, life after dark, clubs, venues change, but they never die.
Okay, fantastic. So, Mark, no pressure whatsoever, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the work that you do with your organization and the role it has in this landscape of kind of club culture and the nighttime economy.
I'll do my best. You should have mic dropped at the end of that. You should just gone. So I'm Mark Lawrence. I head up the Association for Electronic Music, which is the global voice for electronic music. I've been in the role for about 2 years now. It existed for about a year before, but we opened the doors to members at that point. We now have nearly 150 members in 35 countries around the world, and those members range from Live Nation and SFX through to Ministry of Sound Defected, through to Mansion, which is an underground nightclub in Shanghai, which is 2 miles outside the centre. We have to walk past a very low-slung building, look for a hole in the wall, climb through a hole in the wall, move into someone's lounge, ask the barman at the corner of the lounge, where's the nightclub? You open that door and you go downstairs, and there's a room about this big with lasers at head height and the most amazing sound system on a cobbled floor full of Chinese nutbags losing it. And they're members as well. So you're literally everything, and Mixmag and technology companies. It's the entire ecosystem. And essentially, the organisation has been set up to ensure a sustainable future for electronic music, creatively, commercially, and culturally, which is why the entire topic of nightlife is so critical right now, because on our watch and in our membership, we have large organisations who've supersized electronic music. So if you take the baton pass from everything you've just said and that cultural inheritance and importance, when I was 15, I left home. I was 15 in 88. What could go wrong? At 16, 1989, walked into the Zap Club, shouldn't have let me in. And the Zap Club is a beautiful club in Brighton because it has 2 thick double doors to reduce the sound escaping, and then it has a long wall that you walk down, which is very, very dark. And then you turn the corner, and so I open the doors, and you could, and then you walk down the wall, and there was Voodoo Ray playing, and that was my first moment in a nightclub. Was lasers, lights, 500 people, and Voodoo Ray, and that was me done really for. I don't know how old I am now. It's after 40, you lose track. But I think what's happened in the last 5 years since the sort of the reappropriation of electronic music in America is what I would call commercial supersizing. In the same way as what McDonald's has done to a burger, and in the same way that Ford did to cars, what they've done is they've taken something that was distinctly underground, distinctly unique, and distinctly cultural, and then applied all of that American commercial show me the money sensibility to it, and said, okay, so we can do something with this because the kids love it. So what we'll do is we'll put this incredible infrastructure over it, and we'll create superstars out of DJs, and we'll create this amazing environment with light shows and soundscapes and everything you could possibly want, like a city from the stars for 3 days, so you can all lose yourself in something amazing. And those festivals have really come in North America. I mean, there's something in the region, I think, of nearly 2 million tickets sold to those festivals, I forgive me for not knowing the exact number, in 1 year, with a very similar lineup across all of them, with that very big EDM sound. And that overused phrase of curation is quite absent now. And I'm being quite bold here because I'm talking about some members of my own organisation, where everything is kind of been driven by brand association, because many of the events can't take place without a brand across the top, because the economics of those events now are such that the expectation from the crowd of the sound and the light and the roster is one that's almost unsustainable unless you have brand money across the top. And the brands are dying to get in because it gives them access to the millennials. And then you get into this almost addictive circle of ever bigger look at my event, ever bigger look at the brand I've got attached, ever bigger look at the fee I can charge. And the people that lose, apart from potentially the fans, is the nightclub and the nightlife community. Because what's happened, I think, is we've reached this seismic shift, or this incredible junction, where you simply cannot afford to go clubbing every Friday and go to a big festival. So a lot of people wait and go to the festival because that's where you're going to see the DJs, that's where you're going to get the lineup, that's where you're going to get the wow moment. The technology that everybody uses is primed for festivals and not primed for clubs. It's look at me, here I am, I'm at this, sharing that, I've been there. SFX did some analysis on social media, and 3 months before and 3 months after, the social media started and finished around the event they were going to, around the music and the lineup. And so they worked out that the social exploitation window of an event is 6 months, with the event in the middle. And everything is looked at like that. You look at it, you go, our event is in 3 months' time. The headliners we need to sell the most tickets are this, the price that we need, the brand that we need, the socials that we need, the wraparound we can do this with. What do we do? It's such a commercial enterprise that all of the spirit and wonder of our world from the late 80s, early 90s is almost alien now. And so what you see in London, I think, is clubs, apart from Fabric and Ministry and a handful of others, they can't pay for the talent, they can't pay for the sound system, they can't pay for the light show. Those things are unaffordable. You can't replicate that experience. Mm-hmm. I think the opportunity, though, because I don't think this is a negative, I think it's a turning point, is to go, okay, this was always supposed to be a counterculture. This was not supposed to be commercial. The supersizing, the McDonald's-ness of it is now pop. Now the underground needs to remind itself it's the underground and become a counterculture to itself almost, and go, okay, that over there is not a problem, it's not a threat. That's just the thing that we need to respond to stay on our game. Now how do we get creative? Now how do we create amazing cultural experiences and lifetime experiences for kids that are the new 1988-89, which isn't contrived, isn't brand-led, isn't social media shared, is something that's unique and private in the way that it once was for everybody else, because that's when social consciousness changes. And I think that's what's happening right now, is this a huge disruption creatively, commercially, and culturally around nightlife. And so some of those closures are through people just cashing in their chips and saying, you know what, TfL have offered me 15 million for my club because it sits right on the new line they want to open, so I'm 56, I'll have it. It's not all because the government's got it wrong. And I think the next 5 years is going to be really interesting rather than necessarily really negative.
Well then, okay, Dave, let's talk about that for a second. Imagine that you wake up tomorrow morning and you're a 21-year-old graduate and you're really into, let's say, Italian inflected house, and you're living here in Belfast and you go, okay, do you know what? I'm a bit of a DJ and a bit of a producer, but I also have this appetite to start to create a community of people around me, to start to run events. I'm aware that there are all these massive roadblocks, which are licensing, noise, housing, and in the UK more than probably anywhere else in Europe, we have a lot to contend with when we're trying to put on these live events. Give me the start of a potential roadmap to develop this kind of new creative cultural economy, which is so resonant for you guys and so resonant for each of our generations who kind of come through this experience.
Well, even though I went through all that fantastic experience 30 years ago, I don't feel that those experiences aren't accessible to people now. I think that they are, and I think every weekend people go through those transformative experiences that we did. And in talk about Manchester, Sheffield, Liverpool, cities I know well, I would say there are more good clubs, more good DJs, more great live venues than ever before. So it's not a mountain which no one can climb. So if you're asking me about Belfast, I'll say, well, there are lots of role models out there, but your role model isn't cream or fabric. It isn't somewhere huge, and it isn't somewhere where they're paying X thousands of pounds for DJs. You start small. You start with you and what you're passionate about. You start with your friends. You start in a club where there's capacity is 200. Because actually, that is where happening things happen. You know, in the book I wrote, you know, the cultural significance of places where there were 80 people, you know, is huge. So you can make things happen
within the long tail by finding a group of like-minded souls.
Yeah, of course. You have to. I mean, no one should go into the music industry expecting to make loads of money. You know, so you don't start with, well, let's get a spreadsheet out and work out, you know, where let's not get a holiday brochure out and work out where we're going to spend our thousands that we're going to make out of promoting nightclubs. You're kind of coming at completely the wrong angle. So you start by creating something. And, you know, people who approach me and think of me as some kind of a guru say to me, where should I go out in such and such a place? What are the happening clubs? And I say two things. One is, don't ask a 54-year-old, you know, because if you'd asked a 54-year-old where to go out in Manchester in 1988, they would not have sent you to the Hacienda. And the other thing I say is, don't go to anywhere where the capacity is more than 325, because the minute you do, people are compromising, you know? Go to somewhere small, because that's what counts. So, yeah, you can make something happen. I mean, you can't obviously sustain a life and pay a mortgage running clubs where the capacity is small, but you can start something both for yourself and your friends and your city.
Can I just...
please do.
It's a really interesting point, because on the recent trip to India, I think you kind of saw the legacy unveiling in front of our eyes of let's call it the EDM scene, which we can all see splintering now, which was that at the end of every panel, no matter what the panel content was, and it was a very full room, like the same size as this, full of young Indian, mainly producers, you'd get a queue of producers coming up to you saying, how do I get my track to spinning? And I kid you not, I got asked that question 15 times in 6 hours.
Right.
And you'd sit and spend some time. I said, why? What? Why are you asking me how do I get my productions to spin? And like, well, I've made my track, and you listen to it, and it's like literally a sound-alike of any top 10 tech house track on Beatport. And now I need to get it on spinning. And it's a legacy born of the fact that the 1% earn so much that everyone feels that you can get straight there. So there's an immediacy thing. So what I'm not doing is being negative about technology, far from it. I'm a firm user of all the technology available. But you have to use it with care. What's happening with the disruption of technology is, I want to listen to it, I got it. I want to see it, I can see it. I want to go there, I want to get it. I want to make a track, I can make it. And just because you can doesn't mean that you should. And so what's happening, I think, in India is that no one's taking the time, as a London cabbie would call it, to do the knowledge. So instead of going, right, I know I'll set up my own record label. I know I'll set up my own publishing company. I know I'll set up my own online blog. I know I'll get my mates in a room and with some decks and have a party, and then next week there'll be more mates, and the week after that there'll be more mates. Everyone's just going, right, I know what I need to do. I need to get my track like that one, get it to spinning. That will get me signed. That will get me a DJ gig, because the world of DJ and producer is so now intimately entwined that you almost don't have the DJ as a separate entity anymore.
Yes.
That means that once I've done that, I can get out of India and I can be in America, and then my world is saved. It's like going to London with the streets paved with gold. And I sat down with a few, and a couple of them came to IMS last week, and I'm like, did you listen to what I said? Because in the end, I think in the closing comments, I said the one thing I urge you to do in India is to stop for a minute and build your scene. Don't rush to copy that one. Build the Indian one that's so bloody unique that everyone comes to India. Don't try and get yourself into America. That's the last thing you want to do. There's no legacy, and there's nothing long-standing if you just press, I want it now.
And that's the thing, is to build a scene and to build an ecosystem. And actually that's easier now than it was historically. You know, one of the first things I ever promoted was a live performance by Sonic Youth, it was their first headlining show in Manchester in 1985. How did I find people who might be interested in paying £1.50 to see Sonic Youth? I stood outside a record shop with flyers, and every time anyone bought anything remotely sounding like the Velvet Underground or the Jesus and Mary Chain, I stopped them, and I said to them, there's this band from New York, you will love them, it's only £1.50, they're playing on Monday, come, okay? And I did that for like weeks.
Right.
Well, now you can find your network, you can find the fans, you can build that community much, much quicker now than you could back then. Word of mouth is always the most important thing, but you can build online your community, you can tell people what you're doing, you can track down people who might be interested in what you do far easier. So there is no excuse. So I would, that's what I would say to that young person. There is no excuse not to do it. And don't ask permission of anyone. Just use your imagination and your inspiration and work hard.
It should be
Get up at 7 o'clock in the morning. It isn't difficult.
It should be to create, not to copy. And I think that's the bit that I see most is this sort of, I want to be that rather than I want to be me. And I know sweeping generalizations and at some point they can sound insulting, but when you've had the 15th conversation in 6 hours, that's exactly the same as the last one about, I want to be that rather than I want to be as good as I can be. And so, I think you're right. It's that's how it should be used.
Do you think there's also a sense in which we're talking about this kind of nighttime economy, nighttime environment, and obviously primarily from the perspective of the producer DJ who wants to kind of be involved in this and maybe do a bit of promotion as well. Is there a sense now in 2016 more than ever that the producer DJ also needs to be aware of all the other opportunities that sit around this in terms of revenue streams? We should talk about PRS, we should talk about registering repertoire, we should talk about the fact that, it's not just about the fee or the no fee, it's about all the kind of added value. Are people as aware as they should be, Mark, of all the other money they're potentially leaving on the table?
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of striking to the heart of kind of one half of what the Association for Electronic Music does, which is challenging the existing music industry to ensure that whenever electronic music is played, it gets paid to the right people, which doesn't happen enough. Either things aren't licensed, aren't paid, or are paid incorrectly. And I also, just to say, I don't want to sound like I'm saying anything negative about the most successful businesses and people in electronic music. That's like footballers saying, I don't like the Premier League. Of course you do. You have to love the fact that the top teams exist, but you also have to respect that not everyone's in it and that people have to be at every level and have to be praised for being at every level. But I think Sasha recently said in an interview that he's one of the lucky ones, that many people lost their way on their way to their 40s and 50s in electronic music. Some ended up in a dark place, but mostly it's because they didn't treat their careers as a business. They didn't set about ensuring that they had a team around them who were on point for making sure publishing was sorted, making sure their agreements were right, making sure their agent was locking in the right deals, making sure their brand was being protected, making sure they didn't play too many gigs, making sure that their A&R was right and that their sound was fresh. And the really successful players in electronic music, be they the businesses or the DJs or the producers, are businesses, they are brands, and they treat it as such.
I mean, really, we're saying two different things about your stages in your career. At the beginning, don't treat it like a business. Treat it like a passion and absolutely get involved, and live it 24/7. But then, once you're established or beginning to establish yourself and you're serious about what you do, treat it like a business. You have, that is kind of the stages that you have to go through. If someone had said to me, would I DJ at the Hacienda for free in 1986, I'd have said yeah. But they gave me £35, and that was fantastic, And so that's, you can only deal with what's in front of you in that way.
Yeah, I kind of get this up close and personal every day because my wife runs an electronic music publishing company, and one of her clients is a DJ producer with a residency every other week of the year. And when she processes the royalty statements, it's really interesting because he gets about £100 every 3 months from downloads and streams and £500 from registering his set lists. And so right there is the value of making sure that as a DJ producer who plays probably half his own stuff, she has drummed into everybody that she works with that you register your set lists, however manual that process is now, until there's automation around the world where that reporting of the tracks just happens through technology. Right now you will earn, in this case, 5 times as much money for being a DJ playing your own productions as you would for allowing the market to buy them or play them. And that's really significant because it's the last thing that most DJs do.
A final quick thought from both of you before we move on to Q&A. You will know, because we chatted about it downstairs, and you know anyway from being in Northern Ireland before, that, you know, for those of us who've had the experience of kind of stumbling out of Nizza in Spain at 7 o'clock, blinking into the light, or Trez, or wherever, we don't have the luxury in Northern Ireland of being able to serve booze after 1 o'clock in the morning. And there have been many people, I'm sure people in this room, and people will continue to try and make representations at a kind of public sector stakeholder level towards a conversation about extending our licensing laws. Before we have Q&A, each of you give me a line that I can take to somebody at a civic level that will, you know, make them think about why it's important as we look to developing our club culture and continue the work started by, you know, people like David Holmes at the start of the 90s in Sugar Sweet, right through to the work that people like Bicep and AVA are doing now. Give me an argument to take to them.
It's about, I mean, it is about how you define your city and what value you think the city has. I mean, almost every city, you know, in the UK, really, apart from London, struggles to hold on to young, talented people. You know, they tend to go off and try and find their fortune elsewhere. You know, people leave, you know, even Bicep left Belfast in order to make it. Now, nobody ever left a city saying, I can't live there, there's too much going on. You know? Yeah. So that is why people will stay and why people will contribute and why, you know, why the city's profile will get bigger, is if stuff is happening. And if you put barriers in the way, and whether it's licensing or it's the negative reaction of the local press or the negative reactions from the local constabulary, whatever it is, they're basically putting barriers in the way of people creating a city with cultural significance and a city that people want to live in, and people will move. So it's a kind of cultural and economic argument.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah, I would urge them to take time to understand the alternatives. So when we started to get sight globally of the threats to nightlife, because there is undoubtedly a perfect storm gathering around nightlife that's a combination of inappropriate drug policy, inappropriate licensing policy, outright bans, and also just the sheer commercial and cultural shift away from high street to big festival in a field.
Right.
What we did was we created the Protect the Dance Floor initiative, which wasn't really us leading anything on the cities. It was us creating a platform to join city groups together. So a good friend of mine, Mirik Milan from Amsterdam, who's their mayor of the night, does an incredible job in a pivotal role between the day and the night. And so he's the nightmare. Lutz, who's at the Berlin Club Commission, and we joined them together with Alan Miller at the Nighttime Industries Association in London at the worst point that London was facing. And we're now, by bringing them together and bringing London, the Dutch and the Berlin model. I mean, Berlin is basically 24 hours every day, keep going, Berghain, Saturday through to Monday if you want, and then something else, and then Watergate. You just keep going until you have to eat. But what we were able to do is to bring objective experience and practical solutions from cities proving you can do it into a city struggling to work out what to do. So now that we have a new mayor of London, his first commitment is we will model a role on the nightmare model in Amsterdam or the Berlin Club Commission. We will now do something because we see the loss of value. Because ultimately what you do with a city, it's a shop you can open 24 hours a day with clients that you can sell to 24 hours a day. And if you close your shop for 12 hours, they will go somewhere else. And if they wanted to buy something at 3 in the morning and they can't, then they're going to go to another shop to do it. And so that's what's happening with London, is people are going, well, what's the point in going to London for a long weekend if I can't do this and I can't do that and I can't do that? Because I can do it 50 miles away in Amsterdam and I can do it 120 miles away in Berlin. And to an extent almost now, we can definitely do it in Ibiza. So cities are competing. And London will lose that competitive role very, very soon, if not already. And Belfast probably doesn't even have a chance to get one. So I think how London and everyone else is looking at it, it's basically benefit and cost. If the benefit of being open 24 hours a day exceeds the cost of being open 24 hours a day, then it's simply a no-brainer.
So it's a metric. Okay, we have time for a couple of questions. If anybody from the audience has a question, you'd be very welcome to ask one. I'll bring the microphone over to you. Do we have questions from the audience? Yeah, gentleman at the front. We're going to have Twitter-style answers so that we don't run over too much.
We'll have to say hashtag.
So when you talk about the threat to venues and clubs because of large-scale festivals, I want to ask you, kind of on a positive note, where you think alternative spaces for musicians, whether DJs or live artists, can go towards. So for instance, there's a lot of live musicians in pubs that I've started to notice, and outside of that, like in museums or different spaces, where do you think that could evolve to in the future?
I mean, my 2 bits on that. 2 things are happening at the same time now. One, those super festivals are shrinking. There's less of them, and in a number of cases, they're getting smaller because I think they did genuinely reach saturation point. There's the ever-present, excellent, like the Tomorrowlands and Tomorrow Worlds that inhabit a space that's unique and amazing, but the newer festivals are finding it unsustainable. So they're starting to shrink in size, and they're starting to work cohesively with nightclubs so that you see that the event happens, but around it, all of the nightclubs are engaged in it. And I think so that kind of symbiosis is starting to happen. And equally, almost, I think, in that kind of counterculture, get around the nightclub situation, everybody still wants to party, so everyone's finding the right place. And more businesses that are suffering economically are going, well, I've got a room like this. So as long as we can get health and safety and licensing sorted, and as long as I get decks in that corner and a bar in that corner and a security guard in that corner, let's go. And so in London in particular now, the response to the closure of nightclubs has been legal and illegal alternative venues popping up left, right and centre, which, from a cultural perspective, I think we should welcome.
Dave.
In 140 characters. Be imaginative, but people are. Be resourceful. People are. Do you know what I mean? If you want to put on a club night, you don't knock on the door of the nearest high street discotheque and say, can I borrow your club on a Friday night? And you're quite right. It's, museums, art galleries, old churches, old warehouses, they are great spaces. And although Mark right at the beginning talked about how in that kind of EDM world, people seem to kind of expect a certain level of kind of sound system and a certain level of this, that, and the other. Actually, people don't. People just want to be in a room full of other people that kind of feel the same, that are catching the same vibe, listening to music that potentially is different to anywhere else. So it's about using that imagination and also maybe educating ourselves that a great night out doesn't have to last until 4 a.m. and doesn't have to mean that you take loads of drugs, because you can't in an art gallery in a museum. So maybe it's a way of dance music producers and promoters finding new ways of presenting what they do that doesn't involve staying up all night and getting off your tits. And it is possible.
And here we are in a place that used to build ships, about to have and even fantastic music. Listen, we're going to have to stop it there because we have the next panel starting in about 5 minutes. I know, it's not my fault. All right. Would you please thank our 2 panelists in the traditional manner?